Nikon Z50. It's a brand new mirrorless camera from Nikon that debuted in November of 2019. Now I've been using this camera for the past month to shoot both photo and video with it, and there are lots of things I like about it and a few things that I dislike. So in this video I'm going to talk about 5 reasons why I think you should get this camera and a few things to look out for if you do. Now this is a beginner-oriented camera, so ultimately the question we're trying to answer is, if you're a beginner, is this the right camera for you? Stay tuned to find out. Hey, what's up YouTube? This is Susie with Gemini Connect. I run a photography and videography production company here in Seattle, Washington, along with my partner Martin. We run this YouTube channel where we talk about some of the gear that we use to run our production company. So if you're new here, please consider subscribing. Now onto the Nikon Z50. So I am using the Nikon Z50 as part of Nikon's Yellow program. Now this is a brand new program which is only lasting until March of 2020. It's a pilot program. We're not sure if it's going to be around for much longer, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about it, but in brief, it is a really cool program that allows you to purchase the Nikon Z50 and a lens or two and try it out for a month. And if you don't like it, you can send back all of this gear and get your money back. So I decided to give the program a shot because I've been really curious about Nikon cameras, and even though I primarily shoot Canon, Sony, and Fujifilm today, I actually started my photography career with a Nikon D40. So I have some nostalgia with Nikon, but I really haven't used any of their cameras since I sold my Nikon D700 back in 2012. So it was really cool to get a chance to go back to Nikon and to take it with me on Christmas break when I went down to visit some family and friends in Oregon. But since we're here, let's go ahead and see how vlogging is with the Nikon Z50. Okay, so on to the 5 things that I like about this camera. First of all, I love the build quality and the ergonomics of this camera. It's a really small and compact camera, and in a lot of ways it reminds me a lot of the Sony a6000 and the Sony a6300, which I owned up until a couple months ago and I sold it to a friend. Size-wise, it's a little bit bigger, which is great if you have bigger hands or if you really like a solid grip on your camera, because that was one thing about the a6300 was that it didn't have a really prominent grip, so it was a little hard to hold on to it. But I can safely and solidly hold this camera and walk around without a strap and feel pretty confident. But if you are out shooting with this camera, then obviously you want to use a camera strap with it. So my preferred camera strap is not the one that comes with it in the package, but I really like to use this black Rapid strap. It's a really solid strap that just goes over your shoulder and gives you a nice ergonomic way to hold your camera. And it attaches to your camera via the 1/4-inch tripod screw in the bottom. And along with the build quality and ergonomics, I do have to say that the menu system is really intuitive and easy, pretty straightforward. If you've ever used a digital camera, you're going to be able to find your way around really easily. Much easier than, say, a Sony camera, which has some pretty messy menus. The Z50 also has some really beginner-friendly settings. So up here on top, you'll find the main dial where you can control what mode to shoot in. So if you have any background in photography, you're probably going to want to be in the manual or aperture priority or shutter speed priority settings. But if you don't know what you're doing, then that's totally fine. You can set your camera on P, which is program mode, or auto mode, and you can get shooting right away. There are also 2 additional modes on the Z50, including the scene mode and the effects mode. And I think this is really cool for the Z50 and for a beginner because most cameras do have a scene or effects mode, but you have to usually dig into the menu system to find it. But here on the Z50, you just have this little dial here, and if you ever want to get into those special modes, you can easily flip between them. And it might seem a little gimmicky to be shooting in the special effects mode, but I think it's really fun, especially for something like social media or just to add a little bit of pop and character to your footage or your photography. I also forgot to mention that there's no IBIS or in-body stabilization in the Z50, which means it can be a little tricky for shooting handheld video. May not be the most stable footage, but some of your lenses will have some image stabilization in them, which will help offset that. And also, I forgot to do a test using some of the special effects in video, so this might look really weird or it might look really cool. I have no idea. You let me know what you think. Another thing I really love about this camera is its self-timer mode. So pretty much every camera, including your phone camera, has a self-timer mode, which is really awesome for shooting group photos when you need to set the camera up and quickly jump into it. But one thing that this camera does, which I think is so great for moments like that, is that it includes an optional bracket setting, which is so important because how many times do you set up the camera, try to shoot a group shot, and you take one photo and someone's eyes are closed or like someone has a goofy face. So with that bracket mode, you can actually set the camera to take up to 9 photos in sequence. So I tried that out with my family, and sure enough, it took about about 9 shots to finally get one photo where everybody was smiling at the camera with their eyes open. The second thing I really love about the Nikon Z50 is its viewfinder and LCD screen. So since this is a mirrorless camera, it does come with an EVF or an electronic viewfinder where you can look through the top and you see exactly what your camera is seeing. You can also use the LCD in the back if you don't want to use the EVF, and that just gives you a bigger screen to see what it is that you're shooting. And I love shooting with the LCD. That's something that is really hard to do in a DSLR, so with mirrorless cameras it's really seamless. Yeah, I just love the ability to use that screen to get alternate angles that you wouldn't be able to do if you were only restricted to using the EVF or the viewfinder up top. Speaking of that LCD, it's also a touchscreen, and this is one of the best, most responsive touchscreens that I've seen on a camera. Even compared to like my Sony mirrorless cameras like the A7R III that I have, the touchscreen on this Nikon Z50 is so much better, so much more responsive. You can set your focus points if you're shooting in autofocus, or you can also set your camera settings. So you can use your physical dials on the camera, but you can also use that LCD if you'd rather do it touchscreen style. And one last thing about that touchscreen or that LCD is that it pops out, similar to how my Fujifilm X-T3 and the Sony A7R III do. So you can tilt it up or you can tilt it down, but one additional thing is that you can flip it forward. Now this does have a bit of a caveat in that if you are trying to shoot with a tripod or use that 1/4-inch screw at the bottom to secure the camera, then obviously that flip screen becomes encumbered and you can't quite use it. So adding a flip screen to a camera is something that all camera brands have been trying to do recently, especially in some of their beginner-friendly lines. You know, Sony tried to do in their A6000 line. They had a flip screen that didn't flip down, it actually flipped up. But when it did that, whenever you tried to use an external microphone, such as this Rode Video Micro, which by the way is a really awesome microphone to use with a camera of this size, highly recommend it. Then if you had a flip screen that came up top, then the microphone was blocking that flip screen. So really the only camera brands that I think are getting this flip screen right are Canon and Panasonic, because their flip screens come out to the side. So nice try, Nikon, but work on this a little bit, please. The third thing that I love about the Nikon Z50 is its small but mighty selection of lenses. So the Z50 is the third mirrorless camera in the Z series line. Its bigger brothers are the Nikon Z6 and Z7, but those are full-frame cameras, so they cost more money and they're a little bit more complicated to use. And because that mirrorless camera line for Nikon is so small, there are not a whole lot of lenses that you can use with it. But as a beginner, I think that's actually a bonus, because something that you can really get caught up in is which lens should I buy? And you know, lenses cost a lot of money, they really add up. So as a beginner, I actually think it's much better that you only have 2 lenses really to choose from if you want a Nikon Z lens to go with this camera. So the 2 lenses that you have available are the 16-50 lens, and it's a really compact lens. It's basically a pancake lens. I mean, look at the size of this thing, but it pops out like this and you can, you know, zoom in and out. Basically looks like a point and shoot. It's so small. And the other optional lens that you can get with it is the DX50 to 250mm lens. It's a variable aperture lens, which if you don't know what that means, it's okay. Basically, you just can't shoot very well in low lighting, but you get this awesome range of 50 to 250, which is just fantastic. So that's 250, and then this right here is 50. Now these are not the best lenses in the world, but again, for the range and for the price, I think these are really great beginner-friendly lenses. One little quirk about these lenses though is that for some reason, whenever you attach them to the camera and you power your camera on, the camera says, before taking a photo, rotate the zoom ring to extend the lens. So for some reason, both of these lenses in particular come in a locked mode, so you have to unlock them by twisting that zoom ring, and you hear a little click as it is ready to shoot. So the only problem with that is that it takes a few extra seconds to start shooting. And the way that I shoot is I see something and I immediately want to, you know, capture it. So it's taking a little bit of time to get used to that extra step. And the other benefit to this camera and also the Z6 and Z7 is that both of those cameras have the option of getting a $50 FTZ adapter. And with that adapter, you can use any other Nikon F-mount lenses out there on this camera. So Nikon, like Canon, has been making DSLR lenses for a long time. So the benefit of that is that they have a bigger library of lenses to choose from, and with that adapter, you can use any of those f-mount lenses on mirrorless cameras like this Nikon Z50. All you need is that $50 adapter. So that's a way to further extend your lens choices if you don't want to go with either of these lenses, or if you feel like you've outgrown them at some point and you want to upgrade. So the fourth thing that I really love about the Nikon Z50 is its autofocus. So the Z50 has a very similar autofocus system to the Z6, which is its bigger brother in the Z series line. Pretty much every modern day digital camera has really awesome autofocus. I mean, even our phones are coming with face detect and eye detect autofocus. So it should come as no surprise that a camera like the Z50, which came out in late 2019, also has really great autofocus. Now, in performance, it's not the best autofocus out there. I think Sony is still the king of autofocus, but it is really great in most settings. And so for most things that beginners are shooting, I think the autofocus on this camera is going to suit you just fine. And the fifth and final thing that I love the most about the Z50 camera is its great hybrid photo and video features. So this camera takes really great photos. The images are really crisp and clear, and the colors are just fantastic, even as JPEGs straight out of camera. You have the option of shooting RAW if you want to spend more time in post-production, but I would just say that the JPEGs that come straight out of this camera are pretty darn good. And one of the great things about Nikon is that I think that they have among the best color science out there. I would solidly place them in third place. I think Fujifilm and Canon still have, the best color straight out of camera, but Nikon is up there as a pretty solid third place. I think it definitely outperforms Sony in terms of color. This camera is also pretty fast. It can shoot up to 11 frames per second in continuous shooting mode, which makes it really competitive with that Sony a6000. And paired with its autofocus, you can get some really great photos of moving subjects. But besides photography, the Z50 also has some really great video features. It has a built-in intervalometer and also a built-in video time-lapse mode. So you can use both of those features to get time lapses. If you use the intervalometer, that's going to take a bunch of individual images that you'll have to stitch together in post-production to make that time lapse. But you can also use the built-in video time-lapse mode to take a time-lapse video that is automatically made in camera. This camera can also shoot in 4K resolution or also slow motion, 120 frames per second. And it has really great built-in Wi-Fi, which again is becoming a standard in today's digital cameras. So that Wi-Fi makes it really seamless to connect the camera to your phone via the SnapBridge app. And that way you can download your images or your videos directly to your camera to share them on social media or share them with friends. And you can also connect your phone to use it as an external monitor with your camera. So overall, those are 5+ things that I just love about this Nikon Z50. And I think for you as a beginner, you'll find all of these things to be really helpful as well. But there are a few things that I'm not so pleased about with this camera. First of all is that LCD flip screen that is pretty much useless if you're trying to use it on a tripod. So I can appreciate what Nikon's trying to do with this flip screen, but I do think it's a little bit useless if you can't use it along with a tripod. The second thing I'm not wild about is the lack of a headphone jack. So here on the side, you'll see the 3 ports on this camera. It's pretty straightforward. All there is a micro HDMI, a micro USB, and a mic jack. And so for most purposes, these things are just fine. If you are, vlogging, or if you're just doing casual audio, then having that mic jack is really the most important thing to have. But if you're in a situation where you're shooting somebody and you want to make sure that your audio is crisp as you're shooting it, then you ideally want a microphone jack so that you can plug in a pair of headphones and listen to the audio as you're filming. The lack of that is a little annoying, but the one port that I'm really mystified as to why it's not here is a USB-C port. So this camera does have a micro USB port, which is great for, again, connecting your camera to your computer or also charging your camera on the go through like an external battery or being able to plug it into a wall. But I do wish it was a USB-C port just because all of the rest of my electronics are USB-C, and so it would be a pain to have to carry a micro USB just to charge this camera. And it would also be a lot faster if it was a USB-C port, so I hope that a future version of this eliminates that micro USB and instead puts in a USB-C port. And the fourth and final thing that bugs me about this camera is its battery life. So the battery life is not the worst, but it definitely is not the best either. So Nikon rates this camera to last for about 300 photos. And in practice, I found that it would last for maybe about 400 photos, or roughly a full day, as long as I'm doing intermittent casual shooting. I don't think I'd be able to rely on this camera with one battery alone for a full day of shooting, especially if I was doing video. So in conclusion, should you buy the Nikon Z50? I think that as a beginner photographer or videographer, this is a fantastic camera to start with. It's a really fantastic price point for the body alone, but if you go ahead and add on these optional kit lenses to the bundle, it's a really great option that gives you both a mid-range zoom and a telephoto zoom that can basically cover most of your needs. Now, of course, there are a bunch of other camera options out there. And right now, I'd say that they're all really competitive. I don't think you can go wrong with a Nikon, a Canon, a Sony, a Panasonic. They're all really great cameras, and you really just have to start somewhere. And the beauty about starting with this Nikon kit in particular is that it gives you a really great baseline to get your bearings straight. And when you're ready to upgrade, you can sell this as a bundle to someone else. And that's the exact path that I took when I started out. I started with a Nikon D40. When I was ready to upgrade, I sold that, bought a Nikon D90, then eventually sold that and got a D700. So I really worked my way up, and every time I got to a new camera, I really appreciated everything that camera gave me. If you're a beginner, I definitely recommend starting out with a beginner-oriented camera, such as the Z50, rather than jumping down the deep end and going with the most professional camera out there, because what you'll find is that it's full of these features that take time to understand, versus starting out with a brand new camera that is a little bit stripped down. You learn how to use that well, and then you really appreciate that upgrade when you make it. Please leave a comment below and let me know what you think about this camera. Would you buy it? Have you purchased it before? Let me know, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.